Welcome to Brilliantly British. My name is Lawrence and today I'm going to show you how to make a festive 3-bird roast with all of the trimmings. So as I show you how to make it, sit back, relax and enjoy this episode. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. In today's episode, we'll be tackling one of Britain's most technical dishes. Step by step, we'll be showing you how to butcher, stuff and bind 3 different types of poultry before roasting to produce a fantastic Christmas 3-bird roast centerpiece. Oh, and lest I forget, we'll, unlike many other channels, be showing you how to prepare all of the trimmings from scratch too. So with your interest piqued, allow me to introduce the ingredients to you. For today's Brilliantly British festive 3-bird roast with all of the trimmings, you will need some onion, carrot, celery, Brussels sprouts, parsnips, acorns, chestnuts, dried fruits. In this case, I've got black currants and cranberries. You also need some mixed spice, garlic powder, brown sugar, flour, breadcrumbs, lard, duck fat, sage, parsley, butcher's twine, potatoes, a whole turkey, a whole goose, a whole chicken, some streaky bacon. I'm going for some smoked streaky bacon and some pork mince before finishing everything off with some bottles of wine and of course some salt and some pepper. That's it for the making of this 3-bird roast with all of the trimmings. But before you get started, attend to your hydration, switch on your kettle to brew yourself a nice cup of hot tea so that you can sip on that whilst you cook. To start ourselves off, make sure that all of your equipment, and I'm speaking particularly about your knives, are razor sharp. This will make the job at hand so much easier. Oh, and also have a large bowl prepared. To begin the making of this amazing dish, take your chicken and score through its flesh along the spine. Then remove the wings by cleanly slicing through the joint. On one side of the spine, using only the tip, separate the flesh from the inner carcass. When you arrive at the oyster thigh muscle, use the tip of the blade to carve out the meat from the socket. With that done, using a little bit of force, dislocate the pelvic joint, which should make things a lot easier later on. Continue to gradually separate the flesh from the bone, making sure to stay as close to the bone as possible. As you separate the breast meat from the bone, locate and separate the meat from the wishbone as well, which should make things a lot easier. Eventually, you'll have separated the breast meat, which marks halfway. And then at this point, you'll want to turn the chicken over and repeat on the other side. After having separated the meat on the other side from the bone, whilst holding the carcass, gradually slice to completely separate the chicken from the bone. With the fiddliest part over, what remains now involves removing the leg and thigh bones in order to fillet the chicken completely. So clear your area by taking your carcass and placing it in the bowl that you prepared earlier on. I'll first remove some excess fat, keeping that for later on, and then we'll score along the thigh and leg bone in order to expose the joints and the bones within. Following on from this, using the tip of my blade, I'll separate the meat from the thigh bone, which should be relatively easy, before removing the bone completely. For the leg bone, the method is exactly the same. Okay, with one leg filleted, repeat the recent steps to fillet the other leg. Then slice the breast meat at an angle in order to better distribute, and finish by seasoning both sides heavily with salt and pepper before storing in your fridge. The great news is that if you've never done this before, filleting a whole bird will seem like quite an achievement. The even better news is that you have 2 other larger birds to fillet and season. So in this case, the fun just doesn't stop. The most challenging will be the goose, I think, purely because its fat content will make it particularly slippery. But don't worry, just be careful. The techniques and steps are exactly the same, albeit just on a larger scale. A very important note I should mention is that all the bones and excess fat should be placed in a bowl or on a tray ready for later on, for they will be used to make our gravy. Now, a bit of extra entertainment just for you. The annoying thing for me was that I didn't have enough space in my fridge for all 3 birds. The funny thing is that I got creative and made my own fridge, albeit one that lasts through the night before I'm ready to roast. Anyway, place your meat in your fridge for at least an overnight period to cure and absorb the salt and pepper. Whilst the meat chills in the fridge, I'll break the poultry carcasses down into smaller pieces. Please be careful when doing this. Before spreading out onto a lined oven tray, as you can see, nothing is wasted. Wings, bones, excess fat have all been piled on this tray ready for roasting. The only thing that didn't make it onto the tray was the turkey carcass, as there wasn't enough room on my tray and the bones were far too thick for the knife that I had. But, as the saying goes, waste not, want not. I will place the whole carcass in my deep stock pot ready for later on with the goose and turkey giblets. The stuffing that will go into our roast will consist mainly of chestnuts and acorns, but we'll tackle the chestnuts first. I'm going to be boiling the chestnuts to cook and soften them, but before that can be done, I'll score each of them on the convex side. This will allow steam to escape whilst they cook, as they can explode. Once all of the chestnuts have been scored, transfer to a suitably sized pot, adding enough water to submerge them by say 5 centimeters. Bring them to a gentle rolling boil and then cook for 35 minutes. Ensuring that the contents never run dry. Now, whilst the chestnuts cook, continue by first beginning to preheat your oven. And then take the time to process your acorns. This involves cracking the outer shell, in my case with pliers, removing the shell, and then peeling off the dark skin around the nut. You'll want to remove all or as much as possible, as the skin is particularly bitter. After having placed your acorns to one side, peel and salt your potatoes before placing on a tray alongside your acorns. Slide both trays and your bones from earlier on into your oven, making sure to remove the acorns after 15 minutes of toasting. Remove the potatoes after an hour or so, or once softened, like you can see on screen now, bearing in mind at this stage you don't want to have too much colour on them just yet. As for the bones, when they're dark, aromatic and literally bone dry like this, remove them from the oven and place them in the pot from earlier on along with carrots, celery and onion. I'll then break some of the bones to make some room before covering with white wine and water. The contents should be brought to a boil and then allowed to simmer and reduce for 6 hours. During the roasting of your acorns, potatoes and bones, your chestnuts will have cooked, and at that point, after having removed them from the heat, with them cooling just a little bit, with a spoon or with your hands, carve out the flesh within and discard of the shell. Ideally, you'll always want to peel chestnuts whilst warm, as this becomes particularly difficult when they are cooler. Now, with all chestnuts shelled, I'll first mix together mixed spice, sugar, salt and pepper before gradually trickling in the residual cooking liquid from the boiling of the chestnuts. With that done, I'll then add a portion of my chestnuts and blend until relatively smooth. Because of the size of my food processor, I had to blend in batches, but in no time at all, you should end up with this aromatic, coarse chestnut paste. With the paste made, add your dried fruit, followed by your breadcrumbs and your toasted acorns, which should be coarsely chopped before adding. I'll also add a generous amount of black pepper, garlic powder, duck fat, and that's it with the making of the stuffing. Store that beautiful stuffing in your fridge to chill for an overnight period. The last thing to do on the first day involves removing all of the solid items from your stock pot before sieving to remove any remaining bone and vegetable fragments. What was left behind in my case was probably the richest and most aromatic golden stock that I had ever made. To call it a day, I then returned the stock to my pot and left it to cool whilst covered, and with that, I'll see you tomorrow. Welcome back. It's now time to begin stuffing. Starting with the turkey, take about half of your stuffing, spread it out into an even layer over the turkey, leaving a 1 to 2 centimeter perimeter exposed. After having stuffed your turkey, superimpose your goose atop the turkey and then proceed to stuff the goose with 2/3 of the remaining stuffing. With the goose stuffed, finally continue by superimposing and stuffing the chicken with the remaining stuffing in your bowl. Now with all 3 birds stuffed, cut yourself a 3-meter length of butcher's twine, which should be folded in half and knotted at one end. Then pierce through both sides of the turkey skin at least 2 centimeters away from the edge. With your first incisions made, thread your twine through the holes to begin sealing the roast. After the first few threads, personally, I like to reinforce the threads by looping the twine back on itself. But generally speaking, you'll want to continue gradually making progress by incrementally zigzagging towards the end of the roast. All I'll say is that with this, I learned to take my time, making slow and steady progress. When you come close to the end of the roast, take the time to reposition the internals in order to properly distribute the stuffing and meat within. Having turned the roast breast side up, I then noticed that I'd cut through the skin on the lower part of the turkey, which would inevitably expose a portion of the roast in the oven. So avoid this mistake I made by cutting the turkey in that area. Because of that mistake, I had to wing it the best way I could, as the skin on the lower part of the turkey was particularly thin, which made things a little tricky. But with the end sewn up, I then bound the legs before leading the twine around and over the wings before securing at the legs. I'll then turn the roast over, continuing by creating tension using the twine at the back to begin to posture and shape the roast. I then added another loop, this time around the wings and breast area, before maneuvering, then distributing the loops to shape the roast evenly. Not being completely content, I then fastened another length of twine to the legs before encircling the roast lengthways. And that's it, a stuffed and bound 3-bird roast. Beautiful. But just before you take the time to admire this accomplishment, begin preheating your oven. Setting the roast to one side in a suitably large tray able to accommodate your roast, halve some onions, groove them before cradling celery stalks on top of them. With the onion and the celery bridges made, summon your roast, which should be placed within your tray, or in my case, barely inside. To ensure that I didn't roast dry, I poured some stock into the pan, prepared a tray to rest underneath the roast to catch any spills before setting my 3-bird roast in the middle of my oven to cook low and slow. In keeping with the promise of a roast with all of the trimmings, allow me to show you how to make your own pigs in blankets at home. Start by kneading your mince and room temperature lard together until homogeneous. Once combined, toss in some chopped parsley, sage, and salt, and then mix well. Okay, with the sausage mix made, now for the shaping. With some water at hand, necessary if things become too tacky, take a portion of the mix, then form and roll into a sausage. You should find this really easy and quite therapeutic. In no time at all, you'll have made an orderly array of mini sausages. Now, most of you will recognize that we're almost but not quite done, for the pigs need their blankets, which goes without saying is the easiest thing to do. With all that done, place your pigs in blankets on a lined oven tray ready for roasting later on. But until then, I'd suggest resting them in your fridge. Off camera, I peeled and coarsely chopped my carrots and parsnips into batons before salting and tossing. Following on with the addition of some duck fat to help the vegetables caramelize in the oven. And then lastly, I'll toss in my sprouts. This was done to reduce the likelihood of them falling apart. With them prepped and seasoned, I'll then spread them out on a foil and paper-lined rack as I ran out of trays, sliding it into my oven to bake with my roast. Bringing the sprouts out after 45 minutes. They should be soft and tender as you can see. And the carrots and parsnips I'll bring out after 60 minutes. The tray underneath, it turned out caught and deeply caramelized all of the juices that trickled down onto it. I can only describe this as a deep, dark chestnut 3-bird concentrate, which I had to taste before placing to one side. I'll now recall the pre-cooked potatoes from the day before, and to them add some duck fat before leaving them to rest on the side. With several hours passing, I think it's high time for the big reveal. I mean, look at it. It is beautiful. Just to ensure that it was cooked all the way through, I probed into the thickest areas, making sure that the thermometer had a consistent reading equal to or above 75 degrees C. I then glazed the roast with duck fat to prevent it from drying, and realizing that a lot of the drippings resided in the underside of the tray below, I carefully poured those into my jug to be used later. Until ready to serve, the roast, for best results, should be allowed to rest whilst covered for at least 30 minutes before slicing to serve. The next thing to do involves raising the heat of your oven from 130 to 200 degrees C. Whilst that takes place, lay your potatoes and pre-cooked parsnip and carrot batons on a tray and then roast together with your pigs in blankets. Removing the pigs in blankets once cooked, the vegetables once caramelized, and the potatoes once golden brown and crispy. Whilst the potatoes and veg roasted in the oven, I began heating a pan over a medium heat, and in it melted some duck fat with flour added to it. As my pan began to heat up, I stirred and fried the flour for a minute or two in order to create a roux. To my roux, I slowly poured in my 3-bird roast concentrate, whisking constantly to prevent lumps from forming. After a few minutes of cooking, the gravy should have darkened and thickened. And so at this stage, turn the heat right down and then adjust the sauce's consistency according to your preference by adding more stock if necessary. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it should be now time to serve. Tasting, tasting, tasting. All right, are you ready? Are you steady? It's been a journey making this dish, but I promise you, I know it's going to be worthwhile. So let's do it. All right, let's cut into this juicy 3-bird roast. Let's put some gravy on here just to finish things up. And in 3, 2, 1. The turkey. Let me even get a bit of the goose. Just falls apart. Slow roasting these 3 birds together the way we did. The first thing you get is the mild nuttiness that comes from the chestnuts. You've got the texture coming through with the acorns. You've got the sweetness of the dried fruits in there. You've got some spice coming through. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. The Brussels sprouts, contentious items on this plate. Still a bit crunchy. I love them. I know many people don't. And the potatoes are beautifully, beautifully cooked. I mean, it really makes a difference doing it the way we did. And it's just so much easier, period. Probably the most popular item on this plate, the pigs in blankets. They never, ever disappoint. Beautiful, beautiful. I mean, everything on this plate is beautiful, and it does require effort to make, but I promise you, it's worth it, really. So please, please, please make this dish. Thank you all for allowing me to show you how to make a festive 3-bird roast. Knowing that you like this episode, don't forget to click on the like button, the subscribe button, and the notification button so that you don't miss any of our new releases. Tell everyone you know about the Brilliantly British food on this channel, and follow us on all of the social media platforms that this channel is on, and I will see you next time.